Kings fans, chime in on my negativity and more on this Friday fan feedback edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive comment on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're also on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years, the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster of bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And this is a Friday fan feedback show, and there's no Kings news to update you on. So let's get right to your emails, and we will read them in the order in which they were received, and some editing may have been done for time purposes. Our first email comes from Brian. He is pretty much a weekly emailer. He's in Los Alamitos, California. And he says, the article put out by The Athletic was eye-opening, as I did not think that Kings fans would give them straight Ds from their own fans. However, to my dismay, I could not entirely disagree with the grades. The bottom line is that Kings fans have lost all confidence in Rob Blake and Luc Robitaille. I'm hoping this gets the attention of ownership to act and at the end at least start looking into a replacement for both Rob and Luc. A few seasons ago, it seemed like Rob Blake built a good foundation, but it's apparent that he lacks the experience to build a championship roster. He acquired Pierre-Luc Dubois, but had no plan or any idea for what to do with him. He drafted Arthur Kaliyev, a goal scorer, and wants him to play defense. He traded for Kevin Fiala and stifled his offensive creativity for the sake of defensive responsibility. He signed Cal Peterson to a terrible contract, and he extended Tom McClellan when he didn't have to. Is this what a good GM does? At this point, I'm willing to turn over the GM role to Marky and Eddie. With regard to negativity on the show, I don't see it. I think your opinions are honest and reflect what a majority of Kings fans are feeling. It's really hard to feel confident and super positive in Kings leadership right now. Well, Brian, clearly you're too negative. No. I think when you look at the Pierre-Luc Dubois and the Arthur Kaliyev situation, to me, there seems to be a disconnect either with the coaching staff, Todd McClellan at the time, or the draft part of the Kings. This is not what I wanted to say. The amateur scouting of the Kings, Mark Yannetti, who was mentioned just a moment ago. At least in those situations. Now, when you look at Pierre-Luc Dubois, if you as a general manager want to go out and get a player like that, you have to have a very clear plan as to how he's going to be played, how he's going to be implemented. If you're going to trade away those assets and you're going to sign into that contract, everyone has to be on the same page as far as how he's going to be used. And yes, there's a responsibility on the player's end as well to hold up his end of the bargain. And there certainly was some lacking of that from Pierre-Luc Dubois. But again, it didn't seem to me like there was a clear understanding between Rob Blake and Todd McClellan as to how how he was going to be used, and a plan to implement him putting that best situation to succeed. As for Arthur Kaliyev, I think as you tell the people that are drafting your players, I'm sure that you need to draft the best available players. But at the same time, there is that side of it where if you're going to draft a guy who's not great defensively and has a big upside offensively, how is he going to fit into the system that you're currently running? And again, it seems like that I understand why they drafted Arthur Kaliyev, but they knew the type of player he was going to be when they drafted him. And if they felt like that's not a fit in our system, then you don't draft that player. And again, all of this, though, is incumbent on the general manager to make sure everyone has the clear vision and understands the big picture in all of this, whether it's signing free agents and how you play them, or whether it's drafting players and how they fit into what you're trying to do at the NHL level. Now, those are two examples. There are other examples that certainly that Rob Blake has made as far as trades and players that have been drafted that have worked out, but those are two glaring examples. And again, I think it's fair to say that in those situations there seemed to be some sort of a disconnect, and I think that goes along with the Athletics categories when they said vision, right? That was the last one of the categories, and that's where I think it seems like Rob Blake maybe is lacking in that department. Danny in Toronto checks in. He says, first, I want to send safe travels to fellow Kings fan Allison in Nevada. I listened to your show last week. She mentioned her East Coast trip to watch the Kings. Every year I go see the Kings play in Toronto, of course, Buffalo, and Ottawa. And in recent years, my daughter started university in Montreal, and I've included Montreal in my road trip. You will have an absolute blast talking to Allison and anyone who makes that trip, I guess. Fans in each city are great, and be ready for some fun banter with Leafs fans and the occasional heckle in Buffalo, and you'll get some French slang thrown your way in Montreal. Buffalo, if you want to check out good German beer, go to the Hofbräu House. Toronto, Real Sports is the place to be game day, and in Montreal, anything along Crescent Street is excellent. If by any chance you have time, please be sure to visit the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. You won't regret it. Now to my note about the show. There is no way you are negative. We do live in a time of very negative media, and I can honestly say that you are being objective. The listener who wrote in about being negative should listen to Toronto media about the Maple Leafs to really understand what negative media sounds like. They are ruthless about their team here. Keep up the great work. Again, that was from Danny in Toronto. And Danny, thank you for chiming in. We had a listener, Allison, who was starting the season on the road with the Kings, and she had asked about some advice about where to go to, and very cool. Like I said, I would love to do a trip like that maybe one day, but thanks for chiming in and giving a fellow Kings fan some advice, and appreciate the words about my negativity. Jeremiah in Hawthorne says, I just watched your video on Wednesday about the Kings front office, and for the Kings vision, I give them an F. I don't see the Kings making any progress until Rob and Luke are fired. They rushed the rebuild and gave up so many pieces that Rob thought were going to be good fits for the Kings. I only like the Fiala trade. I hope they can surprise us, because if things go south, the Kings are entering a dark period. And again, that was Jeremiah in Hawthorne. Jeremiah, you're too negative. Look, I'm choosing to be optimistic and take a wait and see approach about this upcoming season. But I felt the same way about the Kings when they went into the playoffs last year against the Oilers. I chose to be optimistic and see what happens. But in my heart, I didn't have a great feeling about it. And that's how I feel about this upcoming season. Again, once the season starts, I'm going to be ready to go and excited about it as anybody. And there are some legitimate things I think to be excited about. Maybe we have an upcoming episode. We'll just focus on what the positives are for the LA Kings, even though I don't think I'm being too negative. But you know what I'm saying? There are some things I'm very curious about, kind of in a enthusiastic way. Jim Hiller, what's he going to do? The young guys, Quentin Byfield, the center. We've talked about some of this before. But I think one thing that Jeremiah brings up, and we'll jump off this bridge when we get there, but it's hard not to consider if this season isn't what we all hope it is, and if the Kings do make a change at general manager, I think there's a serious question about who is going to be hiring the next general manager. Is it the same guys who hired the last one? And, because I think that next GM hire is going to be huge when you talk about the Kings possibly entering a dark period. So that's going to be a huge hire if, in fact, things go a certain way, but we don't know. So, again, we'll jump off that bridge once we get there. Up next, we'll talk about the LA Kings and some more of your reactions to this week's episodes. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Our next email comes from Tom. He is in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and he says, "No, I still haven't met the other Kings fan that writes you from Coeur d'Alene, but I look for him at sports bars when I watch games. It seems we have a few Kings fans that are transplants. I run into a few whenever I rep the team in public," which is interesting because obviously Coeur d'Alene, Idaho is nowhere near Los Angeles, and the population of Coeur d'Alene about 57,000, so it's about the size of Diamond Bar. So to see other Kings fans there is pretty cool. So Tom, I hope you run into the other Kings fan who is a listener or viewer of this program at some point. We need an email about that meeting if it does in fact happen. But Tom says, "I am weighing in on the negativity email and my thoughts about Blake and the Kings. I'm an old school Kings fan and started watching games during the last year they wore Forum blue and gold. I am a Kings for life diehard with a tattoo to prove it. I also take a long view after spending so many years not winning the cup. For me, I get too emotionally invested in the outcomes of individual games and overall season performances, but I usually take the offseason with a grain of salt. Last year, I was excited about PLD in the summer and frustrated when he tanked. Like you, I look at Blake's tenure and I think he's a man who has taken big swings that haven't paid off. Does that make them bad moves? Only if they fail, right? I suspect that Blake started the rebuild and saw it was going much better than expected, and he felt he had an opportunity to win Kopi and Drew and him a cup, so he swung big and missed big. But I also think that if PLD had turned it around in LA, and we beat Edmonton, Kings fans would be fine with Blake acquiring PLD. That's why I don't see you and other Kings podcasters as inherently negative any more than I see some Kings podcasts as mouthpiece for the team. I just think people spend more time complaining than being positive in general, myself included sometimes. I do think in the offseason, Kings fans don't have results-based arguments about player moves or acquisitions, and so every complaint is based on speculation. Opinions from dedicated sports journalists may hold a little more weight from their understanding of players and historical trends, but ultimately, it all comes out on the ice. Peterson was great until he wasn't. Talbot was struggling until he came to LA. Who's to say Kemper won't find some Ranford magic? Edmonton's contract sucks, but what if he's the next Willie Mitchell? In my personal life, I like to assume competence, so I assume that Blake has a plan. Now, no general has every plan succeed, and in the end, if you have more failed plans than successful ones, your plans suck and you're gone. Just my 2 cents. Wish I could do a meetup, but I'm closer to Seattle, Vancouver, and Calgary than I am Los Angeles. If you ever hit the Kraken, Canucks, or Flames road games, let me know." And again, that was from Tom in Idaho. And Tom, I've always said, look, I want my GMs to swing big, but they still have to be smart big swings, right? The PLD trade to me was way too much to give up and way too much to invest in somebody that wasn't a sure thing. I know that you could argue that there's nobody that's necessarily a sure thing, but there are people that are more of a sure thing than not. And to me, he was not in that category. We will get into another player who kind of fits that build that we have an email about coming up. But good email, Tom. Appreciate it. And I will say Seattle is a possibility as far as maybe meeting up someday. Not sure about Vancouver or Calgary, but I definitely want to get up to Seattle. At one point, my wife loves Seattle. She was born there, even though she doesn't really have roots there. But she's always up for a visit up there. So hopefully in the near future, we can make that happen. This is from Scott Miller in Simi Valley, and he says, in regards to the fan rankings and in the recent Athletic article, I'm not surprised, although I give the Kings drafting a B for finding some strong late-round picks in recent drafts, but my grade is lower in regards to their development. As for whether you and your shows have been negative, I say no. I think you've been close to balanced as far as the reality and how you present that reality. I'm thinking of an example pertaining to my last email last week in which I called for the ousting of Blake, Luke, and Bergevin. You took time to remind me that Luke's job as Kings president is to promote the team, handle communications, the media relations, be the face of the team and the community, and to grow the game of hockey, etc. And after thinking about it, Robitaille has done a pretty good job at what he's supposed to do. Not that Luke isn't partly responsible for the woeful state of affairs that plague the Kings front office, but overall, I think I was wrong to call for his ouster. I am positive that Blake and Bergevin need to go, however, and I'll use the word positive to sugarcoat that reality and to make my opinion less offensive to those concerned about the negative future outlook for the Kings. Besides, I can't imagine a Kings team Christmas party without Luke in attendance, so he should not be let go when it comes time for Ed and Phil to clean house. And by the way, isn't it past that time already? And again, that was from Scott in Simi Valley. Scott, thank you for the email. But for the record, I'm not saying that Luke is above scrutiny. I just think as team president, he has his fingers in a lot of different pies. That said, he certainly has some blood on his hands, if you wanted to use a probably too extreme example or phrase. Again, my question though is, if this goes a certain way and Rob Blake's gone after this year, is Luke still going to get a chance to hire the next general manager or have a substantial say into who that next person is? And I can understand people being concerned over that. Our next email comes from Gary in Granada Hills. And he says, Eddie, my brother, you are the best Kings podcaster and the best source of complete Kings information on YouTube. And my response to the negative email is he misunderstood accurate opinions and facts with negativity. And as bad as the Kings were last year, unfortunately, negativity is felt by many of us Kings fans. Keep up the awesome work. Looking forward to hopefully meeting you in person at one of your meetups when the season starts. Go Kings, go. And that was Gary in Granada Hills. Thank you, Gary, for that kind email. I appreciate the confidence in the job I'm doing here. And as far as a meetup for next season, we can definitely make that happen. Looking forward to next season and having a couple of meetups in specific places. And then we've got maybe some watch parties for some road games as well with our friend Jim in Lakewood. So we had a couple of meetups last season, thought they went great, and we will definitely look to do that again this coming season. And pretty much anytime I'm at a Kings game, if anybody wants to meet beforehand or in between periods, love doing it. Up next, we'll talk about the possibility of Rob Blake taking another big swing. That's next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app, dream up any bets I'm in the mood for: baseball, golf, soccer, NASCAR. Never too early to get bets down on the upcoming NFL season. And I know what you're thinking. Sports betting not yet legal in California. However, you can still sign up at FanDuel, browse the latest betting odds of your favorite sports and teams on the Sportsbook app, and get in on the action from anywhere with their free games featuring real cash prizes. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we have our last group of emails and comments. This comes from Mike in Long Beach. He says, before I get to my email, just wanted to say, no way you're too negative. As you have said, you were trying to be honest, and the person that emailed you needs to look no further than the Athletic article you've referenced to see that at least a vocal part of the Kings fan base is very unhappy. And it's Rob Blake that has brought this negativity to the organization, not you. To my question, I read that Patrik Laine has requested a trade out of Columbus. The Kings need a right-handed shot at top six forward. Any chance the Kings could or should look to sign him or trade for him? He feels a need, and maybe the Kings could get him for cheap since his production has fallen off and he has other issues recently. Keep up the good work. And again, that was from Mike in Long Beach. This was the email I referenced earlier about maybe the Kings taking a big swing at a player that probably isn't worth the risk, at least not for the Kings. Patrik Laine, to me, is too much in the mold of Pierre-Luc Dubois to take a chance on. But first off, and we'll even just kind of put this aside, although we shouldn't, Patrik Laine makes $8.7 million per season. The Kings have less than $2 million in cap space. So how they would work that out would be a pretty big hurdle. Certainly Columbus would have to eat some of that salary. How much? Obviously, they wouldn't want to eat much. And then what are the Kings going to give up? Because Columbus isn't just going to let them go for nothing. Again, it's a team that's rebuilding. Maybe they would take draft picks, but then again, how do the Kings fit him under the cap? Okay, well, that's a big part of it. But putting that aside, Patrick Laine's career has taken a downturn recently. And do you really want to get a guy who's trending in the wrong direction now and take a chance on somebody who, if he hits, it's a huge hit. But if he doesn't, now you've got a substantial contract of a player who's underachieving. So when you look at his career, started off amazing. Rookie season, 36 goals. Next season follows up with 44 goals. Wow. This guy's going to be a shooting star. Well, maybe he has been. He's going to be a star. But in the 6 seasons since those first 2 seasons, he's only played a full season once. And his average goals over those 6 seasons is just above 20 goals per season. So you're talking about a guy who hasn't been able to stay healthy. He just came out of the player assistance program. So don't know what that was all about because there's obviously privacy issues. They don't announce it. Could have been mental health. Could have been a substance abuse issue. He's now been cleared to play. He wants a new start somewhere else. And there's that cliche, oh, he just needs to find the right place, a new place, and he'll be back to what he was once again. I see a guy, again, whose numbers are trending in the wrong direction, he's obviously older, and he can't stay healthy, and he's got the off-ice issues as well. I can't see Rob Blake coming off the Pierre-Luc Dubois debacle going in on a big risk for a player like that. Even though, again, as was mentioned by Mike, he would fit a need. And you're right, the Kings do need a top 6 forward, and they do need a right-handed shot. And he certainly could help out on the power play. There are teams out there that would be willing to take a risk on a guy like that. I just don't see the Kings being that team. Edwin in Brea is the closer, and he's our last emailer, but we do have a couple of social media posts I do want to read. But Edwin says, just want to message you on the 36th anniversary of the Wayne Gretzky trade. And that's right, on Friday, it was 36 years. Like Hall of Famer Bob Miller said, the trade of the century, only the Babe Ruth trade could rival it. It changed the NHL forever. Before this trade, 7 of the NHL's 21 teams were in the East Coast. Since, 2 other teams in California, Vegas, Nashville. Look what Florida has done. 2 franchises that have made the last 5 finals and 3 Stanley Cups. Gretzky started the movement to the Sun Belt states. If this trade didn't happen, who knows if we have teams in those markets. Some have worked, others, like Arizona, not so much. So yeah, this trade is important in NHL history. Second, I am maybe a little optimistic the Kings maybe make the playoffs. I'm curious to see what Jim Hiller can do as head coach since he's innovative. Front office, yeah, I question that more. If the Kings can make the playoffs, I'm just hoping for a series win. Other teams are better, Oilers, Stars, Avs, Canucks, for example. However, if we can win one playoff series, that is progress. Hopefully, we won't get the Oilers again in the opening round. Let's face them later on. Hope to see you at some Chargers preseason games. Go Kings, go always. And that was Edwin in Brea, who did include that he's a ice and roller goalie in some leagues in Southern California, and he apparently he backstopped his roller hockey team to a title. So congrats on that, Edwin. He says he's like the Kings. He says he's not as good as he once was as a goalie, maybe like the Kings goalies, but he says he's got some good teams and good players in front of him. Hopefully that'll be like the Kings as well. So yes, thank you for pointing out the anniversary of the Gretzky trade. It was obviously a huge moment in hockey and a huge moment in sports. I will say I will be at the Chargers preseason game tomorrow on Saturday against the Seahawks. So if you're out there, Edwin, let me know. Edwin is a Chargers fan, and just like my wife, so I've seen him at some Chargers things as well. That's the only preseason game I'm going to, and the only reason I'm going is we're going to be in a cabana with free food and drink. So that got my attention. We do have a couple of social media posts I wanted to mention at Locked On LA Kings on X or Twitter. Gwendolyn from Playa del Rey checks in, and I met Gwen last season a couple of times, and one of my favorite Kings fans that I met last year. She says, I love random facts. Who has the longest career in the NHL with the most teams played for? So to answer your question from my minutes-long investigation, I would go with Mike Sillinger. And if you play Puck Doku, he is a must name for you to know. He his first NHL game in the 1990-91 season, his last in the 2008-2009 season, 17 seasons, over 1,000 NHL games for the Red Wings, Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, Canucks, Flyers, Lightning, Panthers, Senators, Blue Jackets, Coyotes, Blues, Predators, and Islanders. Mike Sillinger played for 12 different teams in his NHL career. As far as a player who played a bunch of games for a bunch of different teams, that included the LA Kings, I think Matthew Snyder, the defenseman, would be the man. Over 1,200 NHL games, 21 seasons for the Canadians, who beat the LA Kings in the Stanley Cup final. He was a part of that. Also played for the Islanders, Maple Leafs, Rangers, Red Wings, Ducks, Thrashers, Canucks, Coyotes, and for 3 seasons, the LA Kings. So 10 different teams for Matthew Schneider. And finally, Jacques Wixon checked in on the old X machine there. And he said, Eddie, if I'm not mistaken, Rob Blake was the one to sign Drew Doughty to that 11-year or to that $11 million 8-year contract. You mentioned this week that it was not on Blake's watch. Well, Jacques, April 10th, 2017, Rob Blake was named vice president and general manager of the Kings. July 1st, 2018, Drew Doughty agreed on an 8-year, $88 million contract extension. I stand corrected. The Drew Doughty contract is, in fact, on Rob Blake's resume, and so that makes it even worse for Rob Blake than I had thought. As much as I love Drew Doughty, that was a bad contract. I understand why it was done at the time, but $11 million a year for Drew for that many years was too much. So that goes on Rob Blake's resume as well. So, Jacques, you are correct, and I was incorrect, and I appreciate you pointing that out. I really do. Thanks to everyone who took the time to email or post on social media. Really appreciate it. This show literally is not possible without your participation. If you'd like to get in on next week's fan feedback show, don't forget the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. For you everydayers, or right now you every other dayers until September, we're doing something over on the Puck podcast, the other podcast that I do, where we're doing the Mount Rushmore for every NHL team, which is their top 5 players in franchise history. And up next week on the show is the LA Kings. So I figured I would do an episode of Locked on LA Kings regarding the Kings Mount Rushmore as well. And spoiler alert, Wayne Gretzky is not on my LA Kings Mount Rushmore. And I'm not trying to be controversial, but I'm guessing there'll be some feedback from you guys on that. I will explain why he isn't. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but that'll be a fun reaction for next week's fan feedback show. And I'm not sure if we're going to do that episode of the Kings Mount Rushmore on Monday or Wednesday, but it will come up next week, and you'll have a chance to comment it on next Friday's show. Also, love you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday, and as always, go Kings, go.